Hello, my name is Clifford Brown and I was a choir boy here for 8 years. I joined the choir in 1968 at just 8 years old. Also known as the Cathedral of the East End, it's the largest parish church in London. Welcome to St. Mark's. We walked through these doors twice every Sunday for service. We attended choir practice during the week and sang at weddings and at funerals. The church was part of the Caribbean family, and the choir at St. Mark's was the family. The choir numbered 100 members, 70 boys and 30 girls. The choir became somewhat famous, not only for its size and ethnicity, but also for the distinctive Eton suit worn by the choir boys, based on the uniform worn at the prestigious Eton Public School. St. Mark's provided the backdrop, the scenery to a life that ex-choir members still recall with fondness today. This documentary is about what the church provided to a wider community back then, and in an ever-changing world, what the church continues to provide today. The coming documentary will share personal accounts of ex-choir members and how this unique experience impacted on their earlier years. It's intended to be a journey to a historic time that was both special and rare. I hope that you'll be intrigued enough to share this journey from Eton to Hackney with us. So let's start by naming people at the church who made the choir and indeed the church such a remarkable success, not only here in Hackney, but also further afield around the UK. Starting of course with the vicar, Donald Pateman. His life's work was here, dedicated to the church and the choir. Mr. Donald Patterson, a volunteer church side warden. He was also a successful businessman, designing, manufacturing photography equipment. Much of his time was spent supporting the choir through funding holidays, outings and our famous Eton suits. Frank Smith, the parish clerk and church warden. Edie Smith, our Sunday school teacher and the vicar's secretary. Frank and Edie were considered as an integral to the smooth running of the church and indeed the choir. The Smiths essentially took care of everything and everybody. There was also Mr. Eric Preston, who served the church as a lay preacher, but like most of the church leaders, had a multifunctional role. More will be said about these amazing people later, who all dedicated large amount of their life to support the church and the congregation. There were, of course, numerous other people who were part of making the church what it was. And I'm sure you remember those people too throughout this documentary. So, without further ado, ready to explore? I'm here at King's Cross Station, where I'm about to set off to rediscover parts of the UK St Mark's Choir made regular visits to. We travel to different parts of the country for various reasons, such as to perform, for holidays, rambles and cultural visits. But whatever the travel occasion or reason, it was always an informative and educational experience. I've arrived at Edinburgh Station. I'm about to pick up the hire car and continue my journey north. The travel arrangements back then would have been by an overnight sleeper train in first class. What an adventure. The first holiday took place in the mid-1960s and 4 different choir boys were chosen each year. I was lucky enough to have been chosen to go in 1972. We don't know why we were chosen. I'd like to think it was because we were the best singers that year. And I'm pretty sure it was a blessing for our parents to see the back of us for 3 weeks. All things bright and beautiful, all creatures great and small, all things wise and wonderful, the Lord God made them all. We have arrived. This is the Nethley Bridge Hotel, situated in the Scottish Highlands, where we spent 3 weeks of our holiday. This was the 1970s, and so for boys who, like myself, all came from a simple working class East End surroundings, this trip provided an experience to see part of the country that seemed worlds apart from what we knew. For many boys like myself, it would be our first time away from home to such a faraway place. This is the main dining area of the hotel. Back in our day, it was slightly different. We were always seated at a long dining table at the bay window. The vicar and Mr. Patterson sat at each end. Dressing in our Eton suit each evening for our meals, eating and experiencing lots of tasty new foods, such as the famous Scottish haggis, duck, and lots of tasty desserts. And yes, also free from the daily chores of having to clean my bedroom. We travelled around the Highlands to some great locations, seeing some amazingly spectacular scenery. It was here at Loch Far in 1975 that the holiday, which started out as any of the other previous holidays, was to end in a tragic accident. Choir boy Emmanuel Williams, who had gone swimming in a loch, began to get into difficulties. Mr. Patterson bravely attempted to save him, but both sadly lost their lives. This tragedy was to have both a significant and lasting impact on the church and the choir. The vicar was determined to continue the holidays and the legacy of Mr. Patterson. The holidays to Nephi Bridge continued for a few more years, with the final trip to the Scottish Highlands being made in the late 1970s. This holiday gave me a glimpse of how life can be different, and the interest and aspirations and confidence it gave me in my early teen years are still with me today. This revisit to Nephi Bridge has brought back memories of the excitement and enjoyment I experienced back then. It's time to head the 600 miles that way, back south. This is Northbourne Park School in the beautiful Kent countryside. I'm going to take you back to 1969 when this school was called Betshanner. This amazing estate was hired out to St. Mark's Choir for 2 weeks during the school summer holidays. As the two coaches rolled up this impressive gravel drive, I remember one of the first sight was the vicar, Mr. Patterson, and the other staff members standing here ready to greet us. And about there would be Mr. Patterson's shiny Aston Martin. As I stand here now, I remember the excitement, anticipation as we piled out of the coaches and started to unload our suitcases and all the sporting equipment. We would be then split into 4 teams for the holiday. I remember walking up these stairs as though it was yesterday. In fact, very little around here has changed. These holidays were all about sports, sports and more sports. During the stay, much of our time was spent on these playing fields. There was always a game or something going on, usually football or cricket. Our sports coach, Mr. Wallace, was the man in charge. He made sure that we played fairly and as gentlemen. The games were very competitive. We all wanted to win so we could earn points for our team and be crowned the best team for the holiday. It really did take working as a team to a whole new level. The only time games stopped play was for our light refreshment break of orange juice and chocolate biscuits. For many of the junior boys, it would have been the first time they played competitive cricket and football in such lush surroundings. We're at the chapel, which is situated just down from the main house. We came to the chapel on Sunday for morning service, and being a day of rest meant no sports. Instead, we would don our famous Eton suits and travel to Canterbury Cathedral to attend evening service. There was a family day visit during our stay, which gave them a chance to enjoy this beautiful place. I'm sure they all returned to London quite envious. I have fond memories of this swimming pool. I remember spending so much time around the pool, messing around and taking part in swimming and diving competitions. I could not figure out quite why this swimming pool felt so different to our local bars back then. But now, as I stand here and think, it has to be because this pool is open air, yet another first for the boys. This is the dining hall, which is much the same as it was back then. Mrs. Berry, the head cook, and her team became part of this fantastic holiday experience during the years that I came here. This is where we queued in a noisy but orderly fashion to be dished up with some wholesome meals each day. We would sit for breakfast, lunch and evening meals here. And I recall the boisterous noise and chatter as if it was yesterday. It is here at Bexeter that I first discovered and fell in love with Mrs. Berry's homemade apple crumble and custard. I couldn't wait for seconds. Let's take a look upstairs. Each morning, the vicar, Mr. Smith and other staff members would do a dorm inspection. I remember that we had to make our beds up to almost army barracks standards. We would hear the vicar walking along the corridor, shouting, "Stand by your beds," getting closer and closer. We would all stand by our beds with nervous anticipation, ready for the inspection. I'm heading up to the other dorms. I stayed in Brackenbury. We definitely had to be on our best behaviour because it was next to the vicar's room. It was still a great experience for all of us sharing a dorm. For us Hackney lads, it was a taste of what privileged boarding school life was like. Let's head downstairs to the games room. I recall this staircase being absolutely enormous. The evenings would generally be free time, occupying ourselves with various indoor activities such as snooker and board games. We would also take this opportunity to write postcards to our families back home, or go for walks exploring the woods in the school grounds. This is the room where each evening we would watch cartoons and films. Every year we would watch the scary and classic Ghost Train,
with the very funny Arthur Askey. Even though it was a comedy, it would always send us to our beds thinking of ghosts, or as we would call them, Doppy. I hope you've enjoyed this tour of Betsanger, which I'm sure would have brought back fond memories. It's been a long day, so I'll see you in the morning.
As well as the hive of busy activity and sports we had here at the school, there was also trips to other parts of Kent, such as a visit to Deal to have a barbecue on the seafront. And the day before heading home, we had a final trip to Canterbury without our Eton suit. I had several amazing holidays here and couldn't wait to get back the following summer. My last holiday here was in 1976, with the final choir holiday to this amazing place being in the early 1980s. Let's head back to Hackney, where our journey first started.
But before we do, let's take a detour southwest to a place where not just the choir had the opportunity to visit, but was open to the whole of St. Mark's Church congregation.
The dictionary definition of a ramble: a walk taken for pleasure, typically in the countryside and without a defined route. Well, I think that definition pretty much sums up the church rambles. We indeed rambled in the countryside along a sort of defined route. The church organised 2 rambles a year, normally to 2 different parts of the countryside. The rambles were for the choir and congregation and usually filled 2 coaches. One of our favourite rambling destinations was here at the South Downs. It was simple stuff, just leaving the hustle and bustle of Hackney to spend a day in the beautiful countryside. Of course, it was more than just a leisurely walk admiring the panoramic views. We raced, we had bundles along the way, and had lots of fun. Devil's Dyke was one of the highlights of the ramble. We couldn't leave here without a race or a rapid descent. Well, that was the plan, unless you crashed over and rolled down. So here goes. See you at the bottom. Second thoughts, I don't think the film crew is up to it. So this time, a walk down might be better. Okay, so it was a walk down, but still great fun and fond memories. The ramble gave all of St. Mark's congregation some quality time to spend together, both as a larger church family and also within our own individual families, relaxing and enjoying some of the scenery we saw earlier. I might just organise a ramble reunion. Who's up for that? So, from the rural tranquility of the South Downs to Downs Park, Hackney. We came here every Saturday morning, come rain or shine, to this pitch for football training, led by our coach, Mr. Wallace, and where the football teams for the next Bexana holiday were probably formed. Every Monday night, Mr. Smith would walk us from the vicarage to here, the Chumley Boys Club in Bowling Road, N16. Mr. Smith would supervise us as we honed our five-a-side football skills, basic gymnastics, climbing, table tennis, and many more activities, including teaching us woodwork and joinery skills. The vicar opened up the doors to the vicarage during the week, where we could come after school every day except Mondays, which was the vicar's day off. This was a great help to our parents, as it gave us a place to go until they came home from work. Whilst at the vicarage, we played croquet, chess, billiards, read books, and best of all, were able to read the latest issue of the Beano and Marvel comics. And who remembers that fantastic train set? For those more creative ones, Mr. Patterson ran a photography class every Thursday, teaching us how to take photos and develop black and white films. Often seen at the vicarage during these times would be Mrs. Smith on hand to supervise and keep us boys and girls in check, and Mr. Preston, who as a trained accountant would be making sure the church accounts were up to date. The old church hall, recently refurbished. This is where we came and changed into our cassock and surplice, ready for our choir duties. And for those choir boys and girls who were members of the Cubs, Scouts and Girl Guides, it is here we learn a range of different skills, putting them into practice during our annual Scouts and camping holiday. And during the festive season, it is here we would return from our Christmas carol singing around the parish, where we would have mince pies, orange juice, and spent the rest of the evening playing a couple of lively but fun games of British Bulldog. Those were the days.
I'm Reverend Josh, and Josh Jimba. I've been in St. Mark's Parish since September 2007, and before coming here I was in South London, West Node at St. Luke's Church. The congregation here is very, I have to say it's a mixed congregation. Predominantly we do have African Caribbean folk, and many of whom came to St. Mark's in the 50s and 60s and the 70s, and did bring, of course, their children with them to church, and some who have grown and now moved on and have their own families. Some still come to visit the church here and worship with us on occasion. It's always a joy when we see folk who've had connection with church, St. Mark's Church in the past, bringing their grandchildren or great-grandchildren to be baptized or to be christened in our church. That is really fantastic. Part of engaging our young people and keeping those already here in our church is those also who are out in the community. And having had St. Mark's, a place that so many young people have passed through in the past, and some of those were here in the 70s, I have to say even the 60s, maybe even in the 50s. They've gone out there and have made a success of their lives. Would like to see some of those people come back and help us in some ways to help the young and upcoming generation, as it may be role models to them, and instill, as it were, those values of hard work, and share with them some of their experiences and some of their successes, so that it becomes something that would be of help to our young people. It's always a joy to have former choir boys and girls come to visit the church and just to hear their take on what it was like being at St. Mark's and being in the choir, and also involved in various activities, for example, the clubs which were run at Chomley Hall and so on. Parents would have looked, as it were, for their children to be in a safer environment, and so this was a place for them. So yes, the memories for most of them are good memories, and it's something that they actually talk about with great pride and with great joy, I have to say.
I'd say we joined the choir about 68, 67.
67, 68.
Yeah? So we were around about the 8, 9 years
Yeah.
old. A lot of the,
Yeah.
I joined the choir when I was 9 or 10, which would have been 1967, 1968.
Fourth year of primary school, so that would have made it year of 1966. Would have been 9, coming on 10.
I joined St Mark's Choir when I was about 9. It sort of was the next step from the Sunday school.
Between 66, 67 or 68. So I was about 8, 9, 10 when I joined. And I know that some of my siblings joined at different times because of our ages. So,
yeah, I think I was about 11 years old when I joined. So it was, would have been 1973.
I'd got into some family problems, and my grandmother, who was a member at the church, she spoke to the vicar and says, look, I have my grandson. She wasn't well enough to look after me, and would he be interested in taking on a young boy to stay at the vicarage? And the vicar said, yeah, I'd be more than happy, because Donald was going back, but from a financial point, who's going to support him? And Mr. Patterson jumped in. And Mr. Patterson said, I'll pay for his upkeep. We'll look after him, and I'll pay for him. So Mr. Patterson paid for my upkeep. The vicar gave me a roof over my head, and I became a part of St. Mark's establishment. The most enjoyable part of being in the choir was just being part of a unique community. Acknowledgement of something which we only know about now, and when we look back on it and reflect back on it, to say that we did things which nobody else did at that time. Absolutely nothing. There was, I could go to school, and what I could tell them at school that I did within the church, no one could size it up, bar the guys who we went to church with.
The aspect of the choir that gave me the most enjoyment was actually singing. I actually enjoyed singing. I still do enjoy singing, but I've lost my voice. And I loved the hymns. I loved the sound of the organ. And so even now, when I hear hymns, it just takes me back to that tranquil place of being in church.
we enjoyed singing because the hymns then, I actually enjoyed the hymns. So believe it or not, actually the singing, even though there's a lot of recreation stuff, I actually enjoyed singing.
What I enjoyed most about being in the choir was the singing, learning music. I was also doing private piano lessons on the side after school, so I could sight read music, and that just helped me to practice.
what aspect of the choir gave me the most enjoyment? I'm not sure. I think for me, there was this great sense of family. There was this great sense of fellowship, great sense of belonging. And there have been a number of different families within this church that has kind of helped in terms of making me feel a belonging. So there has been the Watsons, there's been the Browns, there's been the Geralds, there's been the Joneses up the road.
It was, in a way, it was almost a big part of our life. It was it was like the whole of our social life was around St Mark's. You know, I mean, everywhere we walked, there was a choir boy, you know, because that was it. Everywhere we went was a choir boy or a choir girl, you know, in those times. Well, as part of the choir, we went on lots of trips. Literally, from what I can remember, so some of my favourite was going to the cinema, getting a Knickerbocker of Glory. I remember going to Betts Hangar.
I went to Scotland. Scotland was always amazing for me because we used to go. I think it's from Paddington. We used to travel overnight in a sleeper. So I always remember you slept on the train, right, to get up because it was in a place called Inverness. It was Inverness in Nethybridge that we used to go to, and we used to go there. And basically, Mr. Patterson, the vicar, had a particular place there was a particular hotel we used to go to. You were just basically adorned and by everybody because the staff. I remember the hotel was, you know, I mean, they loved you, and obviously it was a bit of a novelty factor as well having these 4 black boys there. But all you did was basically go for long walks, and we got taken to their favourite loch. You know, and I always remember there we got taken up. I remember going up into the hills one time, whereas we walked up, and I remember for the first time we walked above. That's the first time I realised you can actually get up so high, you see the clouds below you, and that all stuck in my mind. When Mr. Patterson saying to me, "By the way, that's the clouds," or anything like that, and things like that. And then we come back down again, and you used to be able to drink in the stream, and these little things like the fresh water. And he said it's coming from the hills and the mountains and that. And these are all things that you couldn't experience unless you was in the choir.
It was always a trip that I used to enjoy, and even though it was, I mean, for me now, it's a trip up the road, but for me, back then it was like a night out, and we used to go to Southend. I think it was once or twice a year we'd go to Southend. No, I think it was once a year we'd go to Southend, and the excuse was, we're going to Southend to see the lights. Nobody was interested in the lights. It was more, you know, we're going up there to play on the merry-go-round, and you name the game, we were there for it.
I remember Wicksteed Park. I remember being so excited going to Wicksteed Park, and on Saturday mornings we'd walk down Sandringham Road after I'd picked up some friends along the way, and the double-decker buses would be there, and there'd be all this excitement. I'd be excited making my sandwiches the night before because I'm going to Wicksteed Park. Southend was another trip. You know, we'd leave school Friday, I'd be telling my friends, we're going to Southend. And funnily enough, although St Mark's was a feeder for lots of schools, there was only one girl, no, there were 2 girls that went to my school that came to St Mark's, Melda and Linda Chong. And so at school, it was as if we lived this different life. Other children just didn't understand what we were talking about, and we'd be saying, we're going to Southend tonight. Why are you going to Southend? Because we're going to Southend. And it was just such an enjoyable time. The Rambles, Southend, some of the churches that we'd go to, that we'd visit to go and sing. It was just like one big outing, really.
I think for me there was Betts Hangar, which I thoroughly enjoyed, even though the swimming pool was as cold, even during the summer. The choir boys out into the West End to go and see a movie, and then to Wimpy for Knickerbocker Glory. The Rambles, the trips to Norwich and Southend and other places like that.
So us, the choir girls, the trips that we made, part of St Mark's Church, the main one was St Mary's Bay. And St Mary's Bay is in Romney in Kent. And there were a series of, I don't know if they were army huts. I don't know what the phrase was, but it was turned into a like a holiday camp.
Yeah, I remember my days at Betts Hangar. So I remember the first year we went to Betts Hangar. It was such a big ordeal for all of us because it's probably the first time, or one of the first times that we actually went away on holiday. Because we came from a big family, so parents couldn't afford to send or to take us on holiday. And I'm sure it was the same for most of the families that belonged to the church. So going to Betts Hangar, being away from your parents, it was magical.
The great thing about the church was it's not just the choir, we had a whole week of everything. Monday was Chumley Club, Tuesday was Bible study, Wednesday was choir practice for the boys, Thursday was another Chumley Club, and there was a photography club. Friday, there was choir practice for the girls. Saturday, we had either a wedding to sing at, or we had football practice in the morning, because we had a fantastic football team. And I'm going to say this now, and I say this all the time. We were all born at the wrong time, because At the time, black players weren't the in thing back in the 60s and the 70s. But at that time, we had players then who played for St. Mark's who could have made any Premier team back at that time in the junior leagues, and we would have been up there. I mean, you know, there was a guy who, to this day, and I'll always say it, we had a guy in our team called, some people remember him somewhere, a guy called Arnon Bailey. And for me, he was the most phenomenal footballer of his time. Phenomenal. If he was around today, he would have been a multi-millionaire playing football.
So yearly activities was bonfire night. Bonfire night used to be great fun. And carol singing. Now we used to go around the whole parish carol singing. And then after carol singing, we used to come back to the hall and have mince pies and hot drinks and play British Bulldog. The girls was as much as rough and tumble as the boys were, if not probably worse sometimes. Well, that's what the vicar used to say. Sometimes the girls are worse than the boys, and I think we were.
I think the lessons that I learned from being in the choir that influenced my life to this day was about having integrity and about having standards. You know, the structures that we had in St. Mark's, it meant that we had these standards that we had to meet. And it's really funny because I was thinking about this, and even the way that we acted towards one another was guided by standards. You know, there were hardly any arguments or lots of fights, and if they were, other people would be very quick to jump in to try and soothe the passageway. And we weren't allowed to be horrible girls. You know, the older girls would govern our behaviour.
It's the value of true friendships. Because when I think back now to the friends who I had when I was 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 from the church, they're still my friends now. Which is quite, when you think about it, that's like nearly 40, 50 years of a journey. So it's made me appreciate and value some of that upbringing. When I look back, it was a great foundation. As well as it shaped my value, because my values are all shaped around the same sort of Christian value of respect and, you know, loving your fellow man, things like that. I really do take that to heart, you know. So it was a great grounding, I think. That's the only thing I learned, you know.
Yeah.
For me, it was a sense of discipline. I think the vicar and the staff at the church gave us a sense of discipline. We knew what was right and wrong. It's not to say that we still didn't do things that were wrong, but we knew in our hearts what was right and what was wrong. We knew how to love each other, and it wasn't just us, our brothers and sisters, it was all the families that went to the church, all the staff that were at the church. We loved and respected each other, and that I still carry forward today.
For me, the persons in the church, I would say have a lasting impact on my life. I would put it down to two. There were many there's other people that I can remember, and I would say Donald Pateman, which was obviously the church choir, the vicar, right? Because I think as you reflect, you realise just how much of something like a maverick he was, and how much he was the centre focus, right? Because you had all these black communities coming from the Caribbean in the 50s, late 50s, and he kind of brought it together and he welcomed them into the church, and he created something in St. Mark's Church which I believe was unique, and he brought us into a lifestyle, and he was forward thinking. And in the second stage is that when he done that advert looking to actually get choir boys uniform, Mr. Patterson, which again is the second person that was married. Mr. Patterson was a ready-made millionaire. He had Patterson Products, which was a photography product, and he basically commissioned the choir boys uniform. But it was more than that. That was just like the start, because we had the choir boys uniform, which was Eton suit, right? So, and Mr. Patterson, not only he invested his money, he invested his time.
Mr. Pateman, obviously the vicar. And I think one of the reasons he has a lasting impact on my life is because when I look back, I'm in awe of the person that he was. He was just before his time. The things that he did, he really expose us as children of West Indian immigrants to a middle-class life. That's what he exposed us to.
I'd also mention Mr. Smith, because being of a younger, sort of slightly younger generation, Mr. Smith was always there for me. He was always that little voice who used to come and sort of encourage me and just teach me things, games to play and things like that, and going to Chumley Club, badminton, billiards and table tennis, and it was great. It was just it was a great experience. And I'll say those two characters, the vicar, Mr. Patterson and Mr. Smith, were very influencing my life, and I still remember them now.
I am a photographer because of Mr. Patterson. He taught me how to use a camera. He taught me how to develop film. And I still love going into a dark room now to develop film, although we're in the digital world now. But yeah, I think if he wasn't here, if he wasn't there to give me that steer, then I don't know what I'd be doing. I think Mr. Patterson, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, there were a number of people within the church, but those three, in terms of Mr. and Mrs. Smith, also helped in terms of calmness and just a balance. You had the vicar on one hand, who was the authoritarian, and then you had Mr. and Mrs. Smith, who would mother and father you.
The person who made a lasting impact on my life and made my life, I have to say, is the vicar, the Reverend Donald Pateman. I wouldn't even just say that he made an impact, he saved my life. I know it's a little bit of a cliche, but I will honestly say that if I hadn't moved into the vicarage, I most probably would be doing time, or I would be 6 foot under, because life wasn't, for me, at a given time, life for me wasn't great. And the privilege that I had to go and live in the vicarage was something that I can look back on my life and go, that was totally life-changing. So between the vicar, Mr. Patterson, the woman who looked after me, Mrs. Smith, Mrs. Smith, she was for want of a word at the time, she was my mum.
The persons that had a lasting effect on me, I think all of them did for their own reasons. I say Mr. and Mrs. Smith, gave up so much of their time for us. They were always there at the vicarage. Mr. Smith used to take us down to Chumley Club on the Monday night, so we had a community there that we can go and do whatever we want to do. But yeah, they treated us as if we were their children, because they cared for us like their own. Again, Mr. Bedlow, man is a hatter, but again, he had so much love for us that, again, he would go out his way to do anything for us. And then obviously you've got the vicar, who again was a disciplinarian, but he only wanted the best for us, and he opened up so many avenues for us, done so many things for us. But occasionally we'd get upset with the vicar and we'd storm out, and then Mr. Patterson would then come calling, and he'd put an arm around us and say, oh, come on, you know what the vicar's like, he doesn't mean what he said, doesn't mean what he's done. He'd then bring us back into the fold.
Persons that influenced me during my childhood in St Mark's were the vicar and Sister Peggy. Sister Peggy, she was part of ran the Mothers Union. She took the girls out to St Mary's Bay or other youth activities for the girls.
Had Mr. Preston that again would look after us, take us down to his house, and on a Sunday afternoon give us lunch. So I say all of them, spent so much time with us, had so much love for us. The vicar would open up his house to us any day of the week. You go in his house, in his garden, you play croquet. What do black people know about playing croquet? We play cricket, not croquet, but he opened up his lawn for us, taught us so many things to us. And again, they didn't have to do that for us, but they did it out of love for us, and so yeah, they all had a lasting effect on us, and yeah, that would never leave us.
Yeah. There was 3 of us in St Mark's Choir, me, my brother Stephen and my brother Colin. Stephen's no longer with us, but I know he would have been sitting here telling stories of playing football at Beck Centre and Hackney Downs, and I think his nickname was Hackenback or something ridiculous or something. But I know he would have been here today. Yeah, but there's a lot of people from St Mark's, the young people in the choir. A few of them have left us, and I think about them all the time. And every time I walk into St Mark's Church, they're there. And that's what St Mark's does to me.
Looking back, I think I wish I'd enjoyed it more. It was just something that we did, and I think I wish I'd enjoyed every single moment, every single second more, and appreciated what we were given. And I'm thankful for the St Mark's experience, and just being amongst my friends, the girls, the boys. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that, but so many little teenage romances happened at that time. And someone actually said to me, one of the girls actually said to me, she said to me, do you know, Maudlin, we grew up amongst all those boys, and because they were boys, they were like our brothers, and we didn't take any notice of them. But she said she looks back now and they were such decent boys. A lot of them were well brought up and you knew who they were. And it was just absolute fun. And I still have those friendships, boys and girls. We meet each other and it's just like, we just bond. And I'm just thankful that in my life I had that experience. Awesome.
The vicar, Reverend Donald Pateman, Mr. Patterson, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, and to think about it, they've all gone and left us, but they're not here now, but we still remember them because they've been a real stamp influence on all of us within the church. And forgetting the choir, just call it the church, the community, because the choir was a part of us, but the choir was a part of the church, and that church was, there's loads of people who I know that weren't in the choir, but they would still remember the church.
During Donald Pateman's tenure, the church and the choir were celebrated by the local community, educational establishment, and the local press for doing amazingly positive things and engaging young people to develop their talent, excel in sports and the creative arts, as you've seen and heard examples of during this documentary. I think you will agree from the personal accounts you have heard and all those once-in-a-lifetime experiences made such a positive difference to my life, our lives. I'm sure, like many others who were in the choir or involved with the church during the 1970s and 80s, still feel a real privilege and a sense of genuine happiness to have been a part of this remarkable time. And as we've heard from Reverend Josh, the truly amazing work still continues in the church today. If I had to sum up what gives me a real acknowledgement of the success of this church and the choir, it is this. We grew from choir girls and choir boys into adults and left to find our own individual journeys in this world. And yes, sadly, some are no longer with us on earth, but are always remembered along with our other great memories. And that the sense of being part of the choir family bond is firmly embedded and still exists between us today.
loads of characters.
As I said, we're talking maybe 60, 70 boys, right? Yeah. The different characters and personalities that had to get on, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's amazing, really. You know?
Amazing characters.
Yeah, because
Now and again a fight would erupt, but not very often.
you know what?
Not very often.
You know what? If you think of it, the fights were very kind of almost like they're non-entity. They were non-entity. Yeah. It was like a disagreement, boom, 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 and the following day you'd be like, hey, hang on another. I remember falling out with Joe Brand one day, right? And it was the biggest mistake I ever made. Biggest mistake I ever pulled. Joe Brand put me in a headlock, right, and dropped me to the floor. For a week, my neck was crooked like this, right? My neck was like this for a week. And no one else when you do it, right? And that's how it used to be, man. It was like quick. It was one of them movie things, man. It used to go on forever.
I remember fighting with Leonard, and it was similar. I had to punch him, he punched me on the nose, and the fight was over.
Because it was like,
Dennis Morris was the one to take the first pictures of Bob Marley.
Yeah. He always pays homage, though. He always does.
Mr. Patterson was the one who got on the road to that. Because Patterson's products, everything was Patterson.
Yeah.
It was. And you know what?
But Patterson, as he said, he had his own brand.
You know what he was before that?
Yeah.
He was a barrister.
Was it?
Really? That's what he was.
Yeah.
He was a barrister.
He was so
I never knew that.
He was a barrister. His whole family went into the law. Yeah. He was a barrister, and it was from being a barrister that he got into the photography because he realised for him he thought I could do a better job than what I'm doing.
I mean, can you imagine you lot used to go and get bespoke suits? I mean, it's outrageous.
It was based on Eton.
Bespoke.
I know.
They go and get measured.
Yeah, I know.
The pinstripe trousers,
Yeah, we were
the
just second
waistcoat, the
class,
collar.
man. Just second class.
Was it in Savile Row?
Yeah, but you know the pinstripe
Was it?
trousers.
Yeah.
Yes, it was so.
Oh my God.
I never knew that.
Neither did I.
Let me tell you, right? Those suits cost an arm and a leg.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you what we used to do. This is something off the record.
You gotta take it off the
You
record.
can put it on the record, whatever. We used to rave in that outfit.
Sometimes.
With the trousers and the waistcoat.
Trousers and waistcoat.
Not the collar.
No, not the collar.
The collar.
Yeah.
We used to take the collar.
Because you had the
On a
collar
Sunday
shirts.
night, I used to go to a club with the Bird's Nest.
I know, Bird.
Yeah.
Bird's Nest Waterloo. And the Javarises used to come with us. We used to go out in Coldstone, take off the collar, put the collar in the bush, get on the bus, go Liverpool Street, get the train to the Waterloo, come back. And we were the slickest guys in that club. Pinstripe, waistcoat.
Yeah.
Granddad.